Okay, welcome to a second discussion of PJ. We're talking embryos and semen. This is part 2. If you missed the first one, I'll put the link in the comments below. You can follow the first discussion there. We're going to continue with the discussion. We're going to move into some deeper work and just discuss what to look for, how to do things, and exactly how important is genetics and the future of genetics within these programs. PJ, as always, thank you very much for joining us. We spoke last time about genetics and epigenetics and phenotype and the purpose of these embryos. If as a stud breeder, and I want to move forward, and I want to focus on semen now for now on. And when we talk about semen, we talk about bulls. Buying semen for artificial insemination or for embryo work, what is the important, if you have to give advice someone on a few points, say, listen, this is the sort of bulls that you would suggest using in programs like that, what would you be looking for?
So, well, recently in South Africa, you've got some sex sorting machines too. So you've got the opportunity to sex semen, which gives you a few more avenues to pursue. I think the beauty of semen, especially sex semen, if you're trying to build a cow herd, or if you're trying to breed yourself a herd bull, the sex semen using male sex semen becomes an option there too. But I think it stays the same as your breeding objective. Semen just allows you access to the very best bull that you can find at a far more affordable rate than having to go out and buy that bull, a bull that suits your objectives and your resources and your environment the best. And it can overwhelm some producers. Beef producers generally in most of the world don't do a lot of AI. It's really more prevalent in dairy production. We've seen areas like Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, Uruguay really adopt artificial insemination, and their cow herds. You can see the response their cow herds have had to that, and the positive results they've got in just creating uniform cow herds of quality and type that matches. So if you do a sum, and let's say, for example, you want to go out and buy the very best bull you can buy, and you do that same sum where you buy however many units of semen from that bull, and it's all the synchronizing or setup costs, or whether you're going to be heat spotting or whatever it is, the semen always comes to a fraction of the price of actually buying a bull, but it is more work. So, and I think, like in any industry, those that get ahead and become the top 20% of their field are always doing at least 10% more work than anyone else. So there is more work involved. But if you want to make genetic progress according to what your objectives and resources are, it gives you a huge jump forward, because you're getting your first choice. You don't have to. It's not like at a bull sale you get knocked out on your first, second, third choice, and you end up going home with your fourth choice.
The reason why I'm going to this, and I see this especially maybe in less experienced breeders, where they do have the capital behind them to buy expensive animals, that they can. Where they can AI maybe 20 or 30 or 40 cows at a time. But then they buy the cows and the type of cows they like. And let's call it the middle of the road sort of cow, and something that's efficient, feminine and beautiful. And then when they get to the bulls, it's sort of like a lot of people lose that perspective. Then it's becomes suddenly, when the bull's in the ring, or they look at the bulls, they start buying the most expensive or the biggest bulls. That isn't always, it's almost never the right way to go, because a bull is actually the one responsible, or have got a huge influence on the structure within this. I say something, if your bulls, when I talk to people about this, I say to them, your bull you should buy, it should be a bull that you want to, the middle of the road, because it will fix small things within your herd. And I think a lot of people think if I buy the manliest and biggest and strongest bull, and I put that on the best and most expensive cows that I buy at every auction, I'm going to have the best results. And I think that's where a lot of AI and embryo programs fall flat.
Yeah, so like AI or embryos is just a resource and a tool. It's not good or bad. It depends what you do with it. It's like a hammer. You can hammer a nail in, or you can hit someone over the head with it. I mean, it's just a resource. So I think when selecting bulls, whether it's at a bull sale and you're buying live bulls to naturally breed, or you're buying bulls to collect semen to maybe use fresh semen on a lot of your cows and then clean up with that same bull, or whether it's just buying semen itself, the best herds in the world are the ones that breed like to like, generation after generation after generation. So you find that bull that complements your females. You avoid corrective mating, so rather complementary mating. What I mean by that is if you've got an optimum of what you want your female herd to look like, and you've got some cows that are maybe too big, you don't buy a very small bull to make them medium frame. So by breeding like to like, you always have that optimum in mind, and you buy the same type of bull year after year after year that's got balance, that hasn't got holes in it, that has got those fundamentals of masculinity, mass, muscle, structure, some volume and rumen function in them, and then those sexual traits and secondary sexual traits, which South African breeders are very good at identifying. I know what you're talking about. It's you get to an auction and the bull's been hyped up, and he's an outlier for phenotypic traits, or maybe he's an outlier genetically, and everyone moves in that direction because they feel like, this could be like a really good corrective mating on their herd. But eventually you can be in danger of losing the core principles of what that cow herd was produced for in the beginning by introducing these outliers, whether they're negative or positive outliers, to your herd. So I'm a big proponent of breeding like to like, finding your optimum and just breeding everything to the optimum. So if you've got an endurance horse, to make a middle distance horse, you don't breed it to a sprinter. If you want a middle distance horses, all the stallions you use need to be middle distance horses. Otherwise, it's fire and ice. You breed some that are sprinters, some that are endurance horses. You might get some that are endurance or middle distance horses, but they're not going to be prepotent. They're not going to breed what you've made them. So I think being conservative and sticking to your guns in terms of what your objectives actually are, and within the confines of what your environment allows, and as seed stock reduces what your customers' environments allow too, I think you probably are, long term, you're producing a way more valuable asset in a cow herd by sticking to animals that are tightly within those objectives.
Thanks, PJ. Another thing that, yes, and I normally like to throw you under the bus, so this time I'll jump under the bus and you can just join me. We see a lot of the times in breeding that breeds go back to old genetics. So you see suddenly that guys realize that something is not quite, we're not quite happy with the where they're going. And that's for a lot of reasons. I think some of the reasons might be we bring in, if you see newer breeds that's only been here for 20 or 30 years in South Africa, they might not be that in the beginning because the amount of animals available is scarce. So they let a lot of things pass just to build herds and create a bigger amount of animals within the breed. And then also we bred for a long time, we bred for feedlots. And I think a lot of people are now realizing that wasn't quite the middle of the road we needed and wanted within the beef industry. And nothing in the feedlots. The feedlots are absolutely necessity, but we can't breed for them. Otherwise, you don't make money. That's just That's just basics. Using all the genetics and bringing those genetics back, would you say you're against that or for that, or does it make sense to you that this is actually happening within South Africa context?
I think it depends on it depends on the actual context. So I've seen this be very successful and unnecessary at times. So I'll give you a few examples. In the Wagyu breed in North America, in Akaushi and the Black Wagyu, there's a premium paid for the original bulls that came out. So the bulls that actually came out from Japan, anything that's closely related to them seems to get a premium. Now, that doesn't make any sense to me because they've been breeding with a very set objective moving forward. So they should have been seeing genetic improvement year on year if their objectives were right. And they haven't changed their objectives. So it doesn't make sense to go back, to keep going back to the source then. The other problem with that is our memories are very short. You know, we remember an animal from 20, 30 years ago a certain way, but we forget that there were certain traits that we might not have been paying attention to there that, let's say, feet, for example, or temperament, or issues that these animals might have had, or they might have been a lot bigger or smaller than we imagined them to be at that time. Sometimes we get false memories when we move back like that, and we think we're using a bull that isn't actually the bull that we remembered. Now, on the positive side, when breeds have maybe gone in a different direction in terms of objectives, you know, maybe breeding for more growth, more muscle, more milk, whatever it is, more marbling, and they realize that maybe that direction was, like you said, in favor of links further down the value chain, whether it's the feedlots or the processors or the retailers, and not for the family farm itself to profit. And then now they want to pull that back and you know, regroup and move forward again with those initial objectives of basic profitability for farmers on their land. Then it does make sense to go back to a bull that really met those objectives well and had proven daughters, and then reintroduce them. A good example of this is Shaft Angus Valley in the they have a big herd in North Dakota. So in about 2008, maybe somewhere between there and 2010, they reintroduced a bull from the 1970s. And
sure,
he absolutely revolutionized their herd. Not that they needed it. They were already riding high in terms of moving genetics around the world and having a really good bull cell. Their cow herd was good. But they realized that they needed something that was a little earlier maturing, a little easier fleshing, that phenotype was structurally what they were trying to get to. And fortunately, their memory served them well. And this bull, the amount, even in South Africa, the bulls that have come from that Rito bull, there are not many places in the world that haven't seen influence from that 1970s bull coming back. So there's absolute value in that if a breed or a breeder has redirected objectives and needs to do a U-turn to come back to what their fundamentals were. Now, if you're breeding like to like, generation after generation, you're keeping the same objective, in that case, if the bull that you're using becomes, let's say, a 5-year-old, and he hasn't got any sons to replace him, then he probably isn't worth keeping, you know, because he should have had sons to replace him. And if there are sons and they're not good enough, well, then the bull's not a breeder, you know. So that's if you're breeding like to like, but that's a slightly different scenario. I think one thing you said, which really I do agree with, is whenever you're selecting a bull out of your own herd to use, or you're buying a bull, or you're getting semen, that bull has to be as good as the top 10% of your cows, because otherwise you can't move forward. And I think what I've seen all over the world, a lot of guys get bulls out of the middle of the sale, they bring them home, and they're only as good as their average cow. They're not as good as, you need to be selecting bulls that are as good in terms of quality as that top 10% of your herd, because then you can crack on and move forward.
That makes a lot of sense. Yes, on that point, before I move on to my next point, using a bull in a AI or embryo program, I advise people to use something that you can go back to, that you can see there's a lot of its progeny already on the ground, and especially if you want to build a new herd, if you started a new thing, make sure you have a high heat rate, because it's an expensive program, and you want a solid base. You can work to newer and different genetics a little later, but I think the base should be good. Do you agree on that concept?
Yeah, totally. I mean, consistency is key, in any business. So if he's prepotent and there's product on the ground and there's uniformity of type and quality in that product, then absolutely. I mean, then there's reason to move forward with it. And that's why I do favor proven bulls, because proven bulls or the offspring of proven bulls. An animal that is really young and really flashy and really eye-catching, whether it's genetically or phenotypically, genomically, if everything exciting about it is a prediction and not actually something that's proven, I think you start getting into a little bit of dangerous ground there. In terms of putting a production line together of a uniform product. So not just proven size, but proven lines, if that makes sense. And that's where the mother comes in again. Making sure that you're using bulls out of cows that are those best cow families and best cows in each herd.
Yeah, very, very important statement you made there. I'm trying not to focus too much on female lines, because I normally do emphasize that a lot. We've spoken about the importance of that, and I saw the weekend again, when you go buy a bull or a ram or whatever you go and invest in, and you have to go and look at how fertile that female or the mother line is, and that for me is one of the only things I actually look at when I look at a catalog and I look at a bull. I go straight to the dam and to the dams. Go back to the my next thought around it, and it is something that came up, a discussion I had on the weekend with someone, where they used to have in the dairy cattle, but they have national semen that they distributed amongst breeders, to make sure that the quality stays in the national herd, that there's uniformity and there's a clear guidance on where we're going, but it's also a way to make your EBVs a lot more accurate. If everybody's using some of the same semen, now today we can go embryo way as well. Do you think that maybe that is not the worst idea, that breeds go and say, listen, but maybe we should say a percentage of your herd must be part of comes from a national herd bull or bulls, to make sure that we do create that measurement, that we can actually start measuring apples of apples and pears of pears, because a bull in the Karoo and a bull in the Haifa is going to be two different things, and the way they perform is going to be very different, or their progeny. And I think that might be something that we need to consider. Do you have any thoughts on that, or do you think I'm totally missing the point here?
I do have some thoughts on that, Tinus. So it does work, if there's linkage between genetics and herds all over a population, absolutely you get much more accurate EBVs. So I've got several concerns about this, though, and it's still used quite heavily. In a lot of European countries do it. The breed society goes out and selects bulls and brings them in, and semen gets distributed. I lean a little towards being independent on this. I think that farmers need to be scientists and their farms need to be laboratories, and they need to prove or disprove genetics. And through that, some will fail and some will pass, and the market will show us which ones the right ones are. Now, I also understand, and this is going to back up your point, that there are breeders that might have come into the game a little late in life. Their cattle operation might not be their main source of attention. You know, their energy might be going into cropping or game or property development or some other industry. In that case, then there might be value in having like a centralized genetic bank that they can draw from. But the only issue with that is there are a lot of the pitfalls are for me are quite self-evident. The first one is who's selecting those genetics. You know, I mean, throughout, and I'll use North America as an example, but in the 60s, the guys selecting those genetics would have been selecting frame 0s and frame 1 cattle, okay? And in the 70s, they kind of got it right. And then in the 80s, they went to frame 9s and 10s, literally. And then they went extremely low birth weight cattle, and then they went all out on growth, carcass, marbling. Now, they were wrong every single time, okay? So I would, if I was a breed society, I wouldn't want to get myself on the hook for that, because they were influencing people's livelihoods negatively. So yeah, I understand the EBV thing makes sense, except I'll tell you why I have an issue with that. It makes total sense that if you socially engineer, this is with livestock now, moving genetics out into different herds, that you're going to get your database, it'll have a lot more integrity. So if they say this animal is +5 for milk, whatever the number is, like, there's a good chance that it is somewhere around there. My only concern with this is what ends up happening is it's an experiment, right? And the farmers end up being the lab rats. But for this experiment, the lab rats are paying for the experiment. Like, and that's unheard of in science. Like, that the lab rat's the one that actually gets the bill at the end of the day. So yeah, I don't know. I like the idea of letting the players play. The ones that succeed benefit the rest of the industry because they can go there and get those genetics from them. And maybe it right sizes EBVs into their place and says, look, these things work if everyone is measuring everything all the time, accurately, honestly, in large numbers in the same environment, then it works. So it right sizes it that way. But if in order to make it work, you've got to socially engineer. I struggle with that one. I'm not saying I'm right on this, but I do struggle. Like, I know as a breeder, if I'd been sent semen that I had to use in the climate and environment that we were in, I probably would have deregistered my herd and just done it my own way.
Yeah, that does make that. I think the politics around that and everything involved might become a bigger part of the game than anything else.
Now to back up what you said, and I'll show you where it does work. Let's take the Simmental Fleckvieh cattle in Bavaria. Okay, Bavaria's got 1.2 million registered Simmental Fleckvieh cattle. That's just one state in Germany. Okay. Now those cattle are spread across, I'd say the average herd size is 10. Okay. And there are no commercial cows, they're all registered Simmental Fleckvieh. Now, how many of those breeders actually have the time or the inclination to choose their own genetics? Or out of 10 cows, how can you be breeding, the right bull? So a centralized system there, which sends you genetics, that does start making sense. But you still need your actual seed stock producers. Like, within that population, there are bigger breeders who will be, using their own bulls, making their own decisions. And I think it needs to be a choice. Like, either you're going to rely on someone else making your breeding decisions, or you don't want to let the fox into the hen house.
Yeah, no, I hear what you say. But do you think there's a place amongst breeders coming together, say, listen, but we've like-minded breeders saying, listen, let's pick between us. We pick a few bulls that we use in different herds. And these are the rules of the game that we're going to stick by. And instead of forcing it on people.
Oh, absolutely.
That might be the better way to go about this.
So I think around, South Africa is a good example. Like those group breeding schemes with sheep and cattle have worked incredibly well because it's similar objectives. A lot of the time it's similar climate and environment, and they all in. And I think what you're doing is you're just increasing your you're making your genetic base larger. Your opportunity to bring out a really good and useful bull is higher, and then you can spread those genetics right across there. And yeah, absolutely, I totally buy into that. I think that's an amazing model.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I just want to stick there while we're talking about, and it sort of comes down to epigenetics and a lot of and feed, but I want to stop and if you go to around South Africa, we've got very different areas and things grow out very differently based on the value of the grass and time of year and rainfall and all that sort of stuff. But if you go buy a bull or a ram in certain parts of the Eastern Cape where they've got this exceptional soil, it seems like they do mature a little easier, they do muscle better. That same bull, and if you use that same bull or ram in your herd up in the high veld, you might get a smaller type or a different, not the same what do you call it, results. How do you balance that when you look at animals?
I think honestly it comes down to type and to balance and not scale. So I mean, and this is the same anywhere in the world. There's certain areas that grow a lot of bone, and they can grow a lot of frame, and like because of the minerals in the soil, because of the nutritional plane these animals are on, because of the climate, there might not be humidity challenge or insect challenge. I mean, they just optimize very, very quickly. But then you go to an area like you've just described on the Highveld where it's a little more testing. If you go through those cow herds, then I think it's about type. It's about finding those big full-bodied females that are feminine, that have got good udders and good skeletons. And the same thing you go and do in the more optimum type conditions. It's that feminine, full-bodied, good uddered, good-footed animal. So you avoid your outliers regardless of what that climate is doing. And those optimum areas, they're going to get away with getting production out of lesser phenotypes, something that's maybe a little taller or flatter, or even a female that's maybe not that feminine. They're still going to be able to get some production out of them because there's extra nutrition, right? So body condition comes easier. And then it's far less forgiving in your more marginal areas like you were describing. But you can go to Mariatsburg or Malmesbury in September, like paradise time of year, and there's still, you can identify the differences in type between those cattle. So we did that. We brought in Angus and Hereford genetics from that area that were the type that we knew worked in our area, and they never missed a beat. They bred the same type we wanted. They adapted. Now, if we had brought something that was maximized there, that was 2 frames bigger, 2 frames taller, maybe more muscle, more milk, more bone, they would never have adapted to our environment. So I think it's about getting that balanced phenotype in your head, and then you can scale it. Like that balanced phenotype is bigger in some places, it's smaller in some places, but as long as that balanced phenotype is present. So yeah, let me give you an example. If you're going into the big maize areas, they can get away with a leaner, later maturing animal, right? Because they've got feed. But when you go through their herds, you can still identify the earlier maturing, easier fleshing, fuller bodied cattle that look like what what you want at home, and they've got those. They've got those as well. You just got to be a little more careful because you don't want to get that one wrong. Now, the other way I've seen this work really well is the guys in those more optimum environments and conditions, when they go to a marginal area and they select an animal, a standout animal from there, what happens when they bring it back to their optimum area is incredible. I mean, that animal just explodes in a positive way. So this is where, for me, Tinus, this is where understanding type and having that ideal type in your mind in terms of what animal is going to be productive and profitable for you. You can find them anywhere, and they are everywhere. And it's amazing to me how type adapts. It really, the wrong type doesn't adapt. Where the cattle with some rumen function, with some early maturity, with some easy fleshing ability, and then feet, legs, udders, testicles, and then that hormonal balance, they adapt those cattle. We're not going into heat tolerance and insect resistance now. I mean, that's a different, but even within those areas, the cattle that are tropically adapted, I mean, then you've got all the different types in them as well, right? Now, so I'm not saying that if you take a really balanced animal out of Dordrecht in the Eastern Cape, suddenly it's going to rock and roll in Mozambique. It's not. It's got a limited shelf life when it gets there. But I'm saying in terms of type within those climates.
PJ, I think I just lost you there for a second. Can you just repeat your last sentence?
I was just saying, referring to if you get a bull from Dordrecht and in the Eastern Cape and expect him to go and perform in Mozambique, there's a very limited shelf life for that bull, and it's just because he's not tropically adapted. So, like the thesis I'm giving is within the same climatic conditions. I'm not saying crossing over into tropical conditions. Within those tropical conditions, you're going to find all the different phenotypes that we were talking about. The late maturing lean cattle, the early maturing easy fleshing cattle. They exist in the different climatic zones.
Yeah, and I think we also need to understand, to a certain point, if you breed for something that's going to survive, as I think Mozambique is a great example. That is a tough country. It's really not easy to breed cattle there. It might look a little different, and you might need to breed something a little different there, and you might lose on meat quality because you're now going for a tougher animal that needs to survive in that area. And you need to understand that within your economic environment, the guy that's a little more inland than you might have it a little easier, or a little bit more north or south from you. And that's understanding that there's no perfect cattle. And beforehand, the two of us, we spoke about it and said a lot of breeders like to believe that they've got the perfect breed, and some people say that nature bred this, and but nature's, and you said it nicely, nature is not perfect. How many species is extinct today? I think you mentioned a number earlier.
No, 99% of every species that ever existed is extinct.
No, so that's a great example of how nature is not necessarily the way or the best guidelines, although nature will tell you in terms of what is surviving, what you should focus on, and so it's a process that you need to think about. Before I let you go, if from a stud perspective, and specifically in the South African climate now, we got a lot of breeders. I think new breeders coming in. I think if you look at the amount of new breeders in the South African stud market, it's quite a lot. A lot of them coming from wildlife, or firstly they bought it for wildlife, and later on moved over to cattle, and maybe just because they have the farm, start cattle farming and the stud farming. if you start this late in the game, from my perspective, if you can't afford not to go the embryo route, because you do join the party quite late, and if you're going to start from scratch, you're definitely going to always be a few steps behind.
Yeah. So again, it comes down to those three aspects. It's what are their objectives? Some of them are just to have beautiful cattle on their property and to have fun with them. To be honest about what your resources are, like it's not an inexpensive game to get into. So you need to like have a serious chat with your spouse and your bank manager and say, listen, we're going to sink this much investment into it. And then to truly understand your environment and the climate that you're working in. But like if your resources allow you to go the embryo route and your objectives are to be a really good seed stock producer that's effective within the industry, I mean, embryos get you there so much quicker because you're bringing it from the sire and the dam side, and you can then afford to get into genetics of females that no one's ever going to sell and bulls that someone might have purchased at an amount that you don't want to invest in yourself. So I can just mention from a North American standpoint, it's extraordinary the adopting embryos within the seed stock industry. What's happened with it now? There's barely a seed stock producer not using embryos, and that's why I gave you those numbers on our first thing. I think we'll hit 800,000 embryos this year.
Sure.
And that's because it's penciling out. You know, when they do the sums, it actually works. I'll give you a quick example. We make a Brahman Hereford F1 sexed female embryo for commercial guys, and the commercial guys are like, no, we don't even do AI. We don't even have races. So how can we put embryos in? So we put them in. Now this is a very good beef here, but that embryo, the embryo costs just under $200. Like setting up the recipient, the technicians, the whole process costs $500, okay, for that embryo to put in. The steer calves, because they don't qualify for certified Angus beef, they get docked when you sell them, but they are heavy and they grow, that F1. So they still this year are making $2,500 at weaning for those steer calves, okay? Which if they'd been pure Angus within this climate, they would have weighed a lot less, but they would have sold for more per kilo, okay? The heifer calves, those F1 heifer calves, sold for $4,750, F1 commercial heifer calves. So then embryos become a no-brainer. I mean, you know, why wouldn't you? And I know those numbers are extreme because the last 2 years have been extremely good. But honestly, you can cut them in half and they still work. You know, they really, really still work.
That does make a lot of sense. The last point I want to touch on, and and I know you just came from a show, and I had Alpha Nampu this weekend.
Yeah.
A lot of people do start breeding because they love showing. It's part of who they are. They chose a certain breed. Yes, they might be commercial farmers as well, but they chose a certain breed to start with as a stud breed because they like showing the animals. Now, we had this discussion at Bloom show. We had a deep discussion. I don't want to go there. In total, but guys going into genetics, buying genetics that does show. There's a lot of times people go and buy the winning bull semen or winning cow, and I know from your point of view, it's about the cow choosing an efficient cow and a bull that's the right type, and it's going to fit into a bigger concept in the beef market, but. To this day, and I don't want to criticize anyone, but I think still this time, a lot of times, the animal that do win in the ring and a lot of shows isn't necessarily a functional animal. It might be just the prettiest animal on the day and the best looking animal on the day. The dangers of buying embryos from that and semen from that, how do you look at that as from what you do on a daily basis?
Yeah, so I'm going to need to wrap up here quite soon, but
Yes.
Tinus, for me, the first thing is to understand that the judge on that day, that's his opinion, and let him have it. What I do like about whether it's having cattle have a show or like a selection process the day before an auction, or at a show where there are breeders from all over the country exhibiting cattle, when you're attending as a breeder, and you're observing, or you're a fellow exhibitor and you're observing what's going on, you're the judge, and you decide which bull or which female on that show you want to include into your breeding program. And it might be one that stood 7th in class, but it's the one that's going to suit your objectives and really fit into your breeding program. That is one thing that these shows do, which is positive, and the public auctions where all the cattle from the different breeders come to one place, is it allows a breeder to see cattle from 10, 20, 30, 40 different breeders in one place, and to be able to make selections. And honestly, in the purest form of a show, it's an exhibition, everyone in attendance is essentially the judge. And your decision is actually more important than the official judge, because you get to take that bull home and use them. You get to take that cow home and aspirate her and put her into an IVF program or into an embryo program. So I think that it's again similar to the hammer example we gave. Shows are a resource; they're a tool. You can do damage with them, which people have, and you can do good with them, which people have. But as a resource, their ability to showcase genetics from so many different people in one place to an audience, that's a pretty good resource for whether it's at an auction or a show. That's a pretty good resource for people to make use of.
100%. Okay, I'm going to just end this off for us. My last statement that I was going to leave you with, and just add anything if you want to. At the end of the day, when it comes down to using embryos or semen, it is have a plan, know where you're going, know the reason for what you're doing at the end of the day, and then at the end of the day, it's almost the safe route. The boring route might be the best way to go about choosing genetics. Is there anything that you'd like to add to that?
No, I think you nailed it.
Okay, PJ, as always, thank you very much for taking the time. I know you're a busy man, but yeah, it's been great talking to you once again. I can't wait to see you back in South Africa.
Yeah, thanks, Tinus. Have a good evening.
Okay, you too. Cheers.